I would write you a love song if you love me just a little bit more. I would sing love's praises and forget about the changes this hard life has brought to our door. My heart still beats for you. You act
That's
like
Martina Espada
we
right
are
there.
through. I got the you used to love me, couldn't get enough of me blues. You left me on the side of our dreams, standing on a corner of a deserted street. A hitchhiker without a ride, looking at life from the outside. My heart still beats for you. You act like we are through. I got the you used to love me, couldn't get enough of me blue. My heart still beats for you. You act like we are through. I got the you used to love me, couldn't get enough of me blue. We don't have to wait for a hurricane to hold on tight and keep each other safe. Don't have to be no hard rain to embrace whatever love remains. My heart still beats for you. You act like we are through. I got the you used to love me, couldn't get enough of me blues. You used to love me, couldn't get enough of me blues.
That was wonderful, Josie.
Oh, thank you.
You.
Thanks.
I enjoy listening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you all who are here. Someone else just came. Give me 1 second. Okay. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our second Walking with Whitman. At least it's my second Walking with Whitman since I've taken over as the new event and media director. So my name is Megan Cahill-Asenza. I am, as I said, the new WWBA events and media director for the Walt Whitman Birthplace. For all that don't know, we are a museum located in Huntington, Long Island, New York. We offer tours in person and virtually of the house that Walt Whitman was born in 202 years ago. So also during the event, I will be posting the link if you are willing to donate to our museum. And I'm going to pass it off and give it over to George Wallace.
Very nice. Thank you. And welcome, Megan. Well, I'd like to thank you all for joining us here today at our second event in the 2022 series of readings called Walking with Whitman. It's our 11th. It's our 11th or 12th season. I've been doing this since 2011. Consistently, we've been doing it live in various formats and recently by Zoom. The first half of this year, we're going to be continuing it with Zoom, and very possibly, unless depending on circumstances, in the fall portion of the season, we may very well be doing it live in the birthplace again. But for now, we're here with you by Zoom, and thank you all for joining us. This, by the way, will be recorded and will be available on YouTube in a day or two. I'm not sure exactly when, but you'll be able to enjoy this again. And those of you who are watching this on YouTube out in the future, thank you for joining us. It's always been a great ride to pull together a local, regionally important and significant writer from Long Island and New York, greater New York region, and pair them with a person of national and international stature in this program. And over the years, we've had many, many fine people participating. And I'm particularly excited to have our two people reading today, in that both of them, I think you'll know, because they're not strangers to the Long Island regional community or to the national community, certainly in the case of our national poet. And, you know, without being hyperbolic about it, I'd say that these are two beloved figures because of the work that they do, the quality of their work, commitment of their work, their commitment to their work, and to what their work represents in social and political and even historic terms. So it's a very exciting hearing that we have today, and I think you'll find it exceptional. Even in all the many things that we've done over the course of the years, this is an exceptional pairing today. The first person who's going to be with us and reading with us today is Denis Gray. Denis Gray, you'll know, is a Nassau County guy, maybe Queens, kind of the border, Queens, and some people in New York City know him as a New York City guy. Denis Gray is very well known regionally as a playwright, fiction writer, and a poet. He lives on Long Island with his wife, Barbara. And until we switched his name on the screen, his name was Barbara Gray on the screen. Now it's Denis. He's the author of several novels. He's generally explored the world of blues and jazz musicians who struggle to overcome the obstacles in a city where success is marginal and failure is predicted. These novels, although they're in prose, have the very strong forward movement of bop prosody that you will hear in Ginsberg or Kerouac, and his reading style is very assertively engaging. Dynamic talent, innovative person in terms of, you know, the structure of language, and the subject matter, of course, is fascinating. You're going to hear now from Denis Gray. I think he's going to be reading from Benny's Last Blast, or maybe Black Love Notes, or Della's Deed. We're going to find out very soon. But it's a pleasure to welcome and introduce to you Denis Gray.
Thank you, George. I am going to read from my book, Black Love Notes. I am reading an excerpt from it that will have the two main characters of the book introduce themselves through a night that they spend together in a jazz club. So here we go. Mordecai checked his cash, his financial situation carefully, and it checked out okay, as Mordecai peeled off a few choice bills from the top of his money roll. Mordecai was stepping out on the town tonight. Sweet Tone was playing an out-of-town gig. Harlem, The night was his. He was going to hang out alone, all by himself. Except tonight, Mordecai wasn't going to hang out in Harlem, but was setting sail and dropping anchor elsewhere, far away from Harlem. Mordecai looked like a dapper Harlem Sharpie with the requisite snazzy hat on, in keeping with the day. Last week was when he bought his cool-looking hat. It was a hat designed in the latest uptown het cat style, broad brim, not stingy brim, not that look wouldn't come back in vogue in Harlem like the return of the 20s raccoon coat and ragtime. Mordecai was out of his apartment building and shifting through the Harlem streets like he had 3 nickels for everyone else's dime. Mordecai's nose did an upward tilt as it sniffed Harlem's soft, textured night air like it was the fresh baked sweet potato pie sitting out on the windowsill of some lucky cat's 3rd floor tenement. Mordecai said, nothing like it, man, nothing like it. Mordecai loved these Harlem nights, the colored folk living in Harlem, for he was a Harlemite himself after just 2 months aboard its shores. Harlem nights chatted like parrots at a cracker and cheese party. Harlem nights walked like the kings and queens of spades. Over the past 2 months, it had become the looks and sounds of Harlem that Mordecai Ulysses Jesperson had fallen heads over heels in love with. Never mind the exotic smells. Now Mordecai cocked his hat, and that was a heck of a sight to see. His fingers slipped up under his suit jacket. His fingers fingered his slack-fitting suspenders. Mordecai was standing right smack dab in front of a Harlem subway station. He stared at it like it was a Harlem ghost, him shivering at the counter. Many times before, often really, he heard this station's rumble rise from the underground above ground like a deep rumbling baritone sax. The sound it produced sounded like it could wipe out a 20-piece jazz orchestra. Mordecai had to see what this giant baritone saxophone looked like for himself. Or was it Jonah's Wail? What horn section it played in? He and Sweet Tone had either walked or bus wherever they went in Harlem. Sweet Tone was a bus man like him. Sweet Tone was negligent, not taking him down to the orchestra pit underground, a Southern boy like him. And Mordecai had wondered why. But now was the time to see what kind of instrument produced this all-out, full-blown scale, cacophonous sound, the sound no jazz musician's instrument he'd yet heard produced at a club date or record date. You can do it, Mordecai. I know you can, man. There are no monsters down there. Lon Chaney ain't dressed up like the Wolfman, man. They call it a subway. Harlem nights, color folk up here ride it from home to work, back and forth every day. I know they don't have anything like this back in Hamlet, North Carolina, or any other place I know of. But this is supposed to mark progress, Mordecai. Transportation for the future. The station belts more than it rumbled this time. I wonder if that train was going uptown or downtown. Mordecai was going downtown. He had a special treat in store for himself tonight. Mordecai broke out into a cold sweat as the kings and queens of Harlem passed by, heading for the subway like it was a passing parade. The broad brim of Mordecai's hat was thick with sweat, his powder blue satin, band and all. Keep pretending it's a baritone sax, Mordecai. Keep pretending the subway's baritone sax, man. Keep pretending it's Harry Carney playing baritone sax in Duke Ellington's band. Mordecai was about to enter the subway station. And then Mordecai did enter the station because his body vanished from above ground like no one on earth would ever see. Mordecai Ulysses Jefferson alive again, at least not up in Harlem, at least not at that subway station he'd been standing in front of. Oh, well. Mordecai was out the subway station. He was at the corner of 50th Street and 8th Avenue. And then before he knew it, he was on the corner of 50th Street and Broadway. Oh, man, Mordecai's pulse rate shot sky high. Oh, man, Harry Carney never sounded so good. I'm telling you, Duke, I'm telling you. He was trembling like a leaf. You could stir a sweet martini with the cat. Mordecai looked up the tall buildings to his front. He was back down in this canyon of brick and steel Manhattan. His skin tingled from everywhere. Night lights shone like clusters of small cities atop landing strips. There was a hustle in the streets. There was elegance like a cachet of diamonds. Mordecai looked back at the subway station. He regained his composure. Heck, man, you don't scare me any. Not anymore. But still, Mordecai took off his hat, wiped his forehead clean with his nervous hand. Mordecai was looking for 52nd Street and Broadway and knew how to find it. His hand went down into his front pocket and it touched on his money roll. Mordecai sighed to himself. He knew it was all there, like he just put it under his mattress. Mordecai began walking on Broadway in Manhattan like the kings and queens of Harlem walked their turf. Admittance for two, sir. Mordecai wished he was wearing a black top hat where he could doff it at the pretty young lady at the door with the bright white teeth. One, please. The next set's in 15 minutes. The band's playing, taking a 15-minute break, sir. A pause for the cause, Mordecai said to himself. A pause for the cause. Thank you. The club was full. Mordecai got a table as close to the bandstand as he could possibly get. If he gotten any closer, he might have been ticketed for trespassing. A drink, sir? Yeah, yes, thank you. What do you have? A scotch and soda, please. Coming right up, sir. Oh, this class has class. Class, Mordecai thought. I'll probably have to leave a big tip. I'll probably walk out of here as broke as John D. Rockefeller. How I wish. He saw the piano on the bandstand. He wondered how it played. The bass was parked on the floor, but Mordecai knew no harm would come to it. The drum kit was set up at the right spot. Mordecai thought you could draw a straight line from piano to bass to drums. There was a steel guitar on the guitar stand. Mordecai was in Howard Big Hat Morrison's jazz club, the Big Hat Club. Howard Big Hat Morrison was a colored jazz musician who played jazz guitar and owned a jazz club on Swing Street between 52nd Street and Broadway in the jazz capital of the world. The skinny on the cat, Big Hat, according to Sweet Tone in the Harlem streets, was that Big Hat Morrison had hit the numbers so big that he owned half of Harlem and now clawing his way into Manhattan real estate like a crawfish digging its claws into sand. He's not cheap about spending his money, Mordecai thought, after taking a longer look inside the elegantly appointed Big Hat Club. Thanks. You're welcome. And would there be anything else, sir? For the time being, thank you. This will do perfectly fine. If you need me, just call me. I'm at your service, sir. This club is tops, man, tops. Minutes later, the house lights dimmed. The Big Hat Club was full at peak capacity, big hats and all. Everybody was wearing a big hat in Howard Big Hat Morrison's Big Hat Club. Mordecai couldn't keep his fingers still. He kept eyeing that gorgeous-looking piano sitting right smack in the middle of his eyes like a hypnotist luring him with a silver-plated watch and chain. 1, 2, and then 3 musicians popped up on the bandstand. Drummer, bassist, pianist, in that order. Mordecai had to put his hand the one which was itchy inside his pocket, but now his right hand's fingers tapped the side of the whiskey glass. The 3 musicians had been on the bandstand for a short time, and the club's crowd was getting antsy. Very. When Mordecai saw him, he knew it had to be Big Hat Morrison. Man, was his big hat big. Mordecai's eyes landed on Big Hat. Big Hat bent over to retrieve his steel guitar off the guitar stand. He looked badly upset by something or someone. He strapped the guitar across his chest. He strummed a few chords. He looked at the piano player to give him the downbeat. And on the downbeat, Big Hat Morrison's Big Hat Club's bandstand came alive with music. The guitar initiated melody and then turned everything over to the piano player. Big Hat certainly appeared a mist on the Big Hat Club backstand. The piano player soloed. He was good. Mordecai thought he had a clear tone. He did a 9-bar solo and then turned everything back over to Big Hat Morrison. Big Hat Morrison nodded, seemingly dismissing his anger and settling in on the tune he and the band were playing. Mordecai listened. It was like it was a good thing that Big Hat Morrison owned the Big Hat Club. Otherwise, he wouldn't be playing here tonight. He wasn't a good guitar player. He had to be a much better numbers player for sure, because there was no music coming out of him, just notes that made Mordecai's heart beat cold. Big Hat was in the midst of the solo, his hefty frame hunched over his guitar, making it seem small and insignificant in comparison, when suddenly there was a great hush, then hysteria followed by bedlam. He bounced on the bandstand like something impossible to catch on the first hop. He was light-skinned, looked like a blonde wood piano. It's Bunny Greensleeves, boy, I thought it had to be. Now Big Hat Morrison seemed miffed as hell. This time he looked like the last man on earth with an argument under his big hat. Bunny Greensleeves had a gold trumpet. Mordecai loved it. He pictured Bunny Greensleeves by his name to be short and possessed with stupendous physical power. The trumpet at his lips, Bunny Greensleeves played a riff, a call and response thing with Big Hat Morrison. Big Hat was rankled. The crowd was going wild, fit to be tied. Big Hat attempted to respond to Bunny on his guitar, but it came in off key, out of pitch, his meager efforts falling far short of the mark. Bunny Greensleeves off to something new when Big Hat Morrison, when he did respond, came in late. The guitar off key, his clunky fingers being his own worst enemy. So Bunny Greensleeves reeled off another incredible riff. Big Hat sat draped over his guitar, looking desperate, then bewildered, then hopelessly lost. And it was as if steam were actually jetting out his two big ears even the cat's big hat couldn't hide. Bunny Greensleeves waited and waited for Big Hat's reply. And when it finally came, it was like Big Hat didn't give a damn how bad it sounded. So as when Bunny Greasy took over the Big Hat bandstand, he stood in the bright spotlight. His white suit went with his white shoes and the white hat that was as white as a fresh splash of snow. The trumpet's tone seemed to ride high, and a cloud flashed to strike the Big Hat Club with a single blow, like a lightning bolt out of the sky. Mordecai's hand practically knocked a drink over. On the nightclub table, he was so excited by what he just heard from Bunny Greensleeve's golden trumpet. Bunny's short legs were spread wide apart. His knee claps were springy, bouncing brashly back and forth, back and forth. It was making the drummer sweat, work like crazy. He'd taken a slow tempo, then put this dramatic change in it. This force of nature would seem was out to sweep away any howling hurricane put in its path. Bunny was swaying at his kneecaps now as if a fierce breeze were in his knees. Mordecai couldn't believe the sound this man's horn produced. If he didn't know jazz history, he would have sworn Bunny Greensleeves had just invented the trumpet and how it must be played just then and now on the spot, improvised it all out for himself and then for everyone else. Go, Bunny, go! Blow, Bunny, blow! Blow your horn, man! Oh, Mordecai agreed with the raucous crowd. Did the cat. Bunny looked like a striped tiger in a white suit. Mordecai had come to the Big Hat Club to hear Bunny Greasy play his horn too. Sweet Tone told him he was down here. He finally got enough nerve to ask Sweet Tone about Bunny Greensleeves, as much as he could ask him about him without it coming off like he was a subject bowing, worshiping a god or a false idol. And here he was at last. And there Bunny Greensleeves was at last. Mordecai could practically reach out and touch the cat, pull him and his golden horn, powerfully packed muscle right out the Big Hat Club spotlight and risk what he knew would be for him a sorrowful fate, or much worse, certain death if he tried from the Big Hat Club's unruly, worshipful crowd. Mordecai had heard enough of Bunny Greasy to come away knowing he was a genius jazz cat with a horn. And he'd heard enough of Big Hat Morrison to come away knowing that Big Hat Morrison should donate himself and his steel guitar to the Salvation Army and use it for an end of the year tax write-off for the IRS. Mordecai said, do the two sets by now. By now, his money roll was thinning like a cheap rug. He hadn't even tipped the waiter yet. He'd also been nursing the same drink at the table for the past hour like it was a baby down to his last diaper. The waiter undoubtedly had called on another round, sir. Mordecai began begging the waiter off. And right where he'd finished was where Big Hat Morrison announced, that's it for the night, folks. It's time for us cats to put on our hats. Big Hat tugged at the front of his broad brim, up on the hat rack for the night. Thanks for digging, spending. Don't forget to come back, because we ain't going to forget to be here for you. So till then, we meet again. The pianist stood, the bassist laid his hardwood down on top of the floor, and the drummer started disassembling his drum set. But then Big Hat Morrison shot a stare at Bunny Greensleeves that could starch a roach. Mordecai flinched. Bunny Greensleeves didn't. Then Big Hat shot off the bandstand like an angry bullet. Coolly, Bunny Greensleeves turned, picked up his horn case, carried it over to the piano, and there it stayed. Mordecai, you can touch the cat. You can actually touch Bunny Greensleeves if you want to. Bunny turned around. Mordecai was on the bandstand. Bunny's face shone. Hey there. Mordecai didn't know how to do this simple thing, thinking his unabashed admiration for Bunny Greensleeves was showing on his face like a fresh outbreak of freckles on a 5-year-old. Bunny turned back to his horn case. Mordecai Jefferson. Bunny turned back around. Bunny Greensleeves. I know. Both laughed at the obvious. Guess I was one of them cats who was screaming, go, Bunny, go. Blow, Bunny, blow. Blow your horn, man. Didn't see you, but heard you, Bunny laughed. Had my eyes shut. Was up in the stratosphere, man. Heard everything, but seen nothing. Was on another planet out strolling the boulevard. Bunny looked at Mordecai up and down, sideways and backwards. You a jazz musician? Bunny looked around the bandstand to the drummer and the bass player. You one of the cats, man? One of us cats, man? Bunny asked, his thumb poking his chest. Yes, I'm a jazz musician. I'm one of you cats. Bunny beamed. His hand was out. Mordecai grabbed hold of Bunny's hand, and then Bunny hugged Mordecai and slapped his back. It was 1:25. Bunny hopped off the bandstand. Mordecai hopped off the bandstand. What kind of tip you leave, Mordecai? Bunny quipped. Whatever it was, Bunny, is gone now. So I see. Then they began winding their way out the Big Hat Club. Mordecai seemed to be following Bunny. Bunny looked at Mordecai. Where you from, Mordecai? From down the way? Or are you visiting or staying? I'm from down the way. Me too, man. Philadelphia, Mississippi. Hamlet, North Carolina, but I'm not visiting, but staying. You came through the Port Authority, through 42nd Street on the Greyhound bus? Yes, to all three. Yeah, same as me. It's about every jazz cat story, Mordecai, who comes up here from down the way. Good old Greyhound bus, man. It's got style, got a lot of mileage on it, too. A lot of jazz cats coming in and going out. They began walking up 52nd Street, Spring Street. After a few steps, Bunny turned. He winked at the girls lingering on the Big Hat clubs and bright lights. Got to keep them dames, them skirts happy, Mordecai. So where you staying? Uptown, downtown? Uptown. Harlem? Hey, me too. Thought so. Ain't been up there long, though, right? Right. How'd you know? First you see me play tonight, right? Right. It's how. They were walking slowly, as if conversation was all that interested them, was their coinage. By the way, Mordecai, when instrument you play? Man, hope it ain't the trumpet. Oh, no, Mordecai is shaking his head. Oh, heck no, because if it was, you see, Bunny relished getting this shot in. I know you quit playing it after tonight, have a bad headache in the morning. Bunny said, hoisting the trumpet case triumphantly above his head. Sorry, Mordecai, but my ego's as big as my sound, man. Piano, Bunny, piano. Bunny stopped walking. He studied Mordecai from hat to shoe top. Piano, yeah, you look like a piano player. So Mordecai had to challenge that remark, what seemed such a clearly defined opinion of him. So Bunny, just how does a piano player look? Bunny's pretty brown eyes twinkled, and did his nose twitch. Like you, Mordecai. Exactly like you. No different. To the T. Total T. Gee, that's a lot of help. You good, Mordecai? I don't know. I haven't played for so long. How come, man? My piano's down in Way City, Alabama, the city I just came from. Left. Oh, Mordecai. Bunny said, well, with some surprise. Hey, but every joint up here's got a piano. Everyone I know, but you miss it, man. And I promised that my piano, that is, I wouldn't touch another one until I brought her to New York. I know all of this sounds are coming. Bunny began walking again. Yes, I'm coming. Man. Bunny said, grabbing Mordecai's hand. Hell, we all been there with that rotten luck, with all that. We've all been there where you are when it comes to our instruments, Mordecai. Got to breathe right. Have the freedom to breathe in the air right. Yeah, breathe right with no other horn. Bunny said, placing the horn case flat in his head. But this one, I ain't right. Things ain't right without. But don't you worry, you'll get it back. It ain't gonna be for long. They walked and talked some more until they reached the 8th Avenue subway entrance. Once more, Mordecai's stomach was queasy and his face ashen white. Don't tell me, Mordecai. Yes, Bunny, this will be my what? Second? Yes, second. Riding iron horse. How was the first time around, man? Mordecai was shaking. Oh, Bunny smiled. That bad, huh? Hey, don't worry. Last time I rode the subway, hell, man, my knee joints rather worse than them tracks. Sound like a graveyard full of bones shivering in winter. But I kept thinking about Harry Carney, Mordecai said. Harry? How come? What's that duality cat got to do with riding the A train down from Harlem? I got my reasons, buddy. Glad you're a piano player and not a trombone player, man. Why? How come, Bunny? I got my reasons, Mordecai. Got my reasons. Bunny dipped his hand down inside his snow white suit's front pocket. Out came a token. Bunny flipped it. Mordecai did the same. Exact thing as Bunny. Ready, Mordecai, for the ride uptown, man? Yeah, Bunny, yeah. Mordecai Jefferson and Bunny Greensleeves slipped into the 8th Avenue subway station's entrance, where they get hot on the A train heading for Harlem, since they've been doing just this for lifetimes and lifetimes together. Bunny and Mordecai were out the subway station. We're back in Harlem. Hey, Mordecai, I got a great idea. Hey, man, there's got to be a jam session going on up at Smitty's on West 134th. You do know where Smitty's is in Harlem, don't you? Yes, Mordecai replied. Sweet Tone's taking me there. Mordecai on the train had told Bunny about Sweet Tone. Bunny said he knew him, played with him on a few New York gigs. How about it, then, Mordecai? Yes, Bunny, but what time is it? Don't make no difference, man. No, never mind. You know them cats up there playing all night long, hell, till the moon turns moldy gray or sets over Miami, hell. Them cats either be jamming like crazy or gambling like crazy, either playing music or shooting craps, or both. The after-hours joint, Smitty's Place at West 134th Street, was big enough to fit the necessary amount of people that it had, and smoky enough to call for on the New York Fire Department engine companies number 5, number 6, number 8, whatever. But it was the music that Bunny and Mordecai was in Smitty's after-hours joint for and had. The music coming out of Smitty's Place was muscular, brawny, robust, all-powerful, could knock a super tanker out the water like a toy boat in a tub. Jazz cats were clustered together everywhere. It was like, if you try squeezing one more cat into Smitty's Place, the whole joint might split open like a fat man's trouser. There was fire in their eyes and in their bellies, a kind of madness, quarantined. And indeed, the smoke in Smitty's Place could choke a horse or kill it, and blind a bat partially, but none of these cats seemed to mind. They were old and young and black and white, tall, short, elegant, drab, graceful, clumsy, but there was many an energy in the big room that could light the world 1,000,000 times over and make time never stop. Mordecai, Bunny said, we're going to have get a little closer to the bandstand, man. Oh, it's okay, Bunny. I'm fine right here. But then the music stopped. For everyone in the joint had spotted Bunny Greensleeves, now regarded as the baddest jazz cat in Harlem, in his white suit and hat and with that black horn case of his in tow. Bunny, one of the older jazz musicians moaned, hey, get your young ass up here and play something. Hey, Mo, you know Bunny Grease don't need no coaxing, advertising. Everybody in Smitty's Place would laugh. And then Mordecai saw the jazz cats in front of him clear a precise path for Bunny. And Buddy strutted to the bandstand like he just bought a downtown wristwatch he was wearing uptown. Comfortably mortified, stood back in the crowd. And he didn't wish what happened to Bunny for himself, but the respect from one jazz musician to the other, well, it would be hard not to like that. When Bunny got off the bandstand, he looked around the gym. Hey, Mo, you cats can get back to playing. The Kings arrived. I looked over his left shoulder and pointed to his right with the crap shooters, with the crap table with the crap shooters were shooting dice. Roll, Jelly Roll, roll for your sweet daddy, Jelly Roll. Mordecai laughed. Were these men talking to their dice or Jelly Roll Martin? Because if it was Jelly Roll Martin, he was already on somebody else's roll call for now. He wasn't about to answer them back for a long, long time. But that was only a momentary distraction for Mordecai. For his attention went back to the bandstand and the jazz men up there. What talent, absolute genius he saw before him. But now, the buzz in the room had become almost unbearable. Everyone seemed to be anticipating Bunny. Was it because he had his golden trumpet cupped in his hand? Was it because he had his head stuffed in that white hat of his, bowed as if in some mystical East Indian prayer? Was it because he had a certain clear and defined hunch crunched into his shoulders? Was it because it looked like his short legs could straddle the Golden State Bridge and the George Washington Bridge at the same time? Or was it because his lips were buzzing lightly in his horn, and even so was making a sound that could circle the planets twice around and make them sing as lightly as Ella singing Ellington? And man, Bunny did step up on to the edge of the bandstand. He did separate his short legs like he was straddling continents. And the sound his trumpet made, well, the crap shooters stopped blowing on their dice and stopped calling on Jelly Roll or whoever and started screaming, blow, Bunny, blow! Go, Bunny, go! Blow your horn, man! Smitty was rocking like a houseboat party when his anchor dropped out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean for the night. But he looked as pretty as God must look in a white suit. Mordecai closed his eyes and snapped his fingers, and before he could open them, suddenly Bunny stopped playing and was saying, Mordecai, hey, make a pair for my man, my main man, Mordecai Jefferson, man. And the two men saw the jazz cat named Mordecai Jefferson, the broad-brimmed hat, who was standing there monk-like, and a path was cut for Mordecai per Bunny's instructions, men shuffling to opposite ends of the room in unison, a one-step dance on the dance floor, and Mordecai did not hesitate at all. But not one bit. His fingers really itched, and he was thinking about how it must feel to play with Bunny Greensleeves, with the man with the golden horn. Mordecai was on the bandstand and smiled. Bunny and Mordecai shook hands. Hey, welcome back, Mordecai, to the bandstand, man, back home. Bunny looked at the piano player. The piano player hopped up out the chair and made his own path off to somewhere. Mordecai sat down in the chair. He looked at the piano, just looked at it until Bunny snapped him out of wherever he'd been. You know where we left off, don't you, Mordecai? The tail we're wagging, where it's safe to jump in, where it ain't too deep, man. Bunny to Mordecai's ears made it sound as if they were about to jump into a cool pool. Yes, Bunny. And by mutual eyes and mutual magic and mutual consent, the musicians plucked, struck, and blew their instruments at the same time as if no one but them had such power. Bunny was blowing his horn, walking along the periphery of the bandstand, making the room silly with sound, making everyone in Smitty's space make every human sound a foot, a voice, and fingers can possibly make. Play folk feet tapping like the beaks of woodpeckers pecking wood. People's voices screaming like they were waking Harlem up out her sleep, telling her to get up out of bed and get off to work. Folk fingers snapping like their first and last thoughts had just come in. Jupiter's daddy, Papa's mistake, Susie's cake, paying $100 at the bettor's take, a window on the nose. Bunny's trumpet was pointing to some illusionary object in the sky, but as he did at the Big At Club, he brought it down to point it directly at the next person. Was to take the solo, run the music, the equestrian course. It was Mordecai, man. Bunny had pointed his golden horn directly at Mordecai. Mordecai looked at Bunny's horn, brandishing a look of its own as if to say, time to stretch your stuff, man. Put your cares on the shelf and let all hell break loose. So after thunderous applause from Bunny, it became Mordecai's turn to solo, do his spin, and all the jazz cats in the jazz joint looked at this jazz cat with dubious eyes, while in some way hoping it was one of them, genuine, cut from the same musical cloth. Mordecai felt right at home, his body pulsed warm and light as his fingers skimmed over the piano keys lightning quick. Mordecai grabbed everyone's ear and attention immediately. He didn't want anybody at Smitty to have any lingering doubts about who he was. Yeah, Mordecai had an eagle. Yeah, he had an eagle, maybe as big as his pianos. He stood there on the bandstand, blown away, digging his new friend in Harlem. Mordecai was getting into some serious music, reinventing harmonic patterns to the classic tune they played. Bunny wanted to be with him on this. He began a call response thing with Mordecai, trading choruses. The bass player and drummer had to stop playing. They didn't have the chops. After all, it was a jam session to play on what Mordecai and Bunny were playing. It was turned into a duet, a two-man exploratory enterprise. Smitty's place was spoken. Both Bunny and Mordecai and Bunny's eyes were shut as tight as a bank vault at midnight. They were going back and forth with each other, dueling swords, not thinking, but firing and burning freely, relentlessly, thirstily. They were driving the music into discovery, awareness, freshness, intuitiveness, color, verb of intellectual input, dimension, curiosity, and thought, new and alive. Mordecai had never felt his hands and head sweat with such joy. Cats and Smitties were stuck in a groove. Cats were swinging from star to star. The cigarette and cigar smoke in Smitty's place was being blown out the air and into tiny corners of the universe. Smitty's place went in a state of alarm. There it was. Then it was like Bunny and Mordecai were telling the jazz musicians it was okay for them to come back to join them as they coasted back into a different group altogether, easing the other cats back into a safe harbor. It was so nuanced, performed with such consummate care, delicacy. Smitty's patrons employed. Lucifer, a crap shooter at the crap table shooting crap said to the other, them dudes blew the house down. Every brick, it was bad as a... The young cat blew on his dice. They rolled out his head. 7. 7 come 11, baby. 7 come 11. But the young cat's dice rolled out snake eyes, as big as a baker's bread truck. Baby. Thank you. Back to George.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Denis Gray. Denis Gray took us through the streets. Thank you so much, Denis.
Thank you.
Beautiful work. So glad to have you at the Walt Whitman Birthplace doing this.
Thank you, George.
Sharing your work. Okay. Thank you. We will now turn. I want to give a shout out to, I see a board member from the Walt Whitman Birthplace here today, Robert Savina. Thank you for coming. I see a lot of people from the New York area, but also from Oklahoma, Virginia, other locations. So I have a nice crowd from a diverse set of locations to hear you, Denis, and to hear our
Thank you.
from originally from Martin Espada. This is his book, which just won the National Book Award, Floaters. His photograph is by his father. This is Angel Jimenez, I think. I'm not sure the guy's last name, but was a mushroom worker in Kennett, Pennsylvania, very close to some of the most beautiful country for painting in the world, really, and a home to several generations of great painters. His father was a fabulous photographer. Martin Espada, originally from Brooklyn, and I think of him as a Brooklyn guy, and you'll see in his book a number of poems, reminiscent poems from his time growing up in Brooklyn, is a representative of one of the major accomplishments of 20th century and early 21st century poetry in America, which is the poetry of witness and poetry of conscience. He's a major force and a major voice in that, and has been for decades, really. I've been teaching his work at Pace University to students for many years now, and consistently get an enormously strong response from the students. However, he also is a person who was a representative of a person who's achieved and has faced and confronted and mastered the challenge of that genre, which is to turn polemic and poetry of conscience into art. His craftsmanship is unmistakable. His delivery of his work with his voice oratorically is as unmistakable and compelling. You will read in his books epics, odes, songs, laments, castigations, all sorts of different presentations of poems, some of them very tender, some of them bitter, but all of them really infused and empowered by his commitment to the justice and the injustice issues that he sees in the world. I could read you his bio, but I don't think I need to. You'll know and love Martin Espada's work. This isn't a one-off recognition with the National Book Award. He's a finalist, has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Guggenheim's won a Guggenheim, Ruth Lilly Award. I could go on, but I think it'd be much more productive and much more exciting and wonderful to welcome back, I think for the third, possibly this is the fourth time, to the Walt Whitman Birthplace, my friend Martin Espada.
Thank you very much, George. I'd like to thank my old friend George Wallace for that introduction and for everything he does on behalf of poets and poetry, of which this series, Walking with Whitman, is just one small part. Tremendous energy and commitment to poets and poetry, as well as being a fine poet in his own right. I'd also like to thank Megan Kehoa-Sensor and the Walt Whitman Birthplace Association. Yes, I have been here either in person or virtually any number of times, and I'm glad to be back again. I'm glad to be here in the company of Denis Gray. Thank you for that reading. And in the company of Josie Bello. Thank you for that music. I also would be remiss if I did not thank my wife, Lauren Marie Schmidt, for being there on every single page of this book, Floaters. I'll read 6 poems from the book. I'm going to start off with the first poem in the book. It's not a coincidence that it's poem number 1. 30 years ago, I was a tenant lawyer with Su Clínica Legal, legal services program for low-income Spanish-speaking tenants in Chelsea, Massachusetts, right across the Tobin Bridge from Boston. My clients came from the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. They also came from Central America, especially El Salvador and Guatemala. In other words, some of the very same people crossing the southern border today, fleeing the same countries left in ruins by President Reagan's wars. The second half of this poem refers to the notorious Chuck Stewart murder case in Boston. So we start with this jumping off the mystic Tobin Bridge. I close my eyes and see him windmilling his arms as he plummets from the mystic Tobin Bridge to prove me wrong, to show me he was good, to atone for sins like seeds in the lopsided apple of his heart, but mostly to escape from me in the back of his cab, a Puerto Rican lawyer in a suit and tie. I hated the 111 bus, sweltering in my suit and tie with the crowd in the aisle, waiting to hit a bump on the mystic Tobin Bridge so my head would finally burst through the ceiling like a giraffe on a circus train. I hated the 111 bus after eviction day in Chelsea District Court, translating the landlords and judges into Spanish so the tenants knew they had to stuff their clothing into garbage bags and steal away again. Away from the 40-watt squint that followed them everywhere, that followed me because I stood beside them in court. I would daydream in the humidity of the bus, a basketball hero, flipping the balled-up pages of the law into the wastebasket at the office as the legal aid lawyers chanted my name. I hated the 111 bus. I had to take a taxi cab that day. "What the hell you doing here?" said the driver of the cab to me in my suit and tie. "You gotta be careful in this neighborhood. There's a lot of Jose's around here." The driver's great-grandfather staggered off a boat so his great-grandson could one day drive me across the mystic Tobin Bridge, but there was no room in the taxi but chalk and a blackboard. He could hear the sawing of my breath as I leaned into his ear, past the bulletproof barricade somehow missing, and said, "I'm a Jose." I could see the 40-watt squint in his rearview mirror. "I'm Puerto Rican," I said. It was exactly 5 p.m., and we were stuck in traffic in a taxi on the mystic Tobin Bridge. The driver stammered his own West Side story without the ballet, how a Puerto Rican gang stole his cousin's wallet years ago. "You think I'm going to rob you?" I said in my suit and tie, close enough now to tickle his ear with the mouth of a revolver. I could hear the sawing of his breath. He still wanted to know what I was doing there. "I'm a lawyer. I go to court with all the Jose's," I said. Stalled traffic steamed around us, the breath of cattle in the winter air. Where are you going for the holidays?" the driver said. I thought about Christmas Eve in court, eviction orders flying from the judge's bench when tenants without legal aid lawyers or children old enough to translate the English of the summons did not answer to their names. Every year the legal aid lawyers told the joke about the Christmas defense. "Your Honor, it's Christmas." I said to the driver, "I will be spending Christmas right here with my fellow Jose's." The driver shouted, "What do you want me to do? Get out of this cab and jump off the bridge?" We both knew what he meant. We both knew about Chuck Stewart, the last man to jump off the mystic Tobin Bridge. Everybody knew how Chuck drove his wife to Mission Hill after birthing classes, the flash and pop in the dark when he shot her in the head and himself in the belly. Everybody knew how he conjured a black carjacker on the crackling call to 911 the way the Mercury Theater on the air conjured Martians in New Jersey on the radio half a century before. Everybody knew how 100 cops pounded on door after door in the projects of Mission Hill, locking a black man in a cage for the world to see like the last of his tribe on exhibit at the World's Fair. Everybody knew how Chuck would have escaped, cashing the insurance check to drive away with a new Nissan, but for his brother's confession, the accomplice throwing the Gucci bag with makeup, the wedding rings, and the gun off the dizzy bridge in Revere. Everybody knew how Chuck parked his new car on the lower deck, left a note, and launched himself deep into the black water, how the cops hauled his body from the river by lunchtime when I walked into the office to tell the secretary Chuck Stewart just jumped off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. I said nothing to the driver. I almost nodded yes in the rearview mirror. I confess, for a flash, I wanted him to jump. The driver, the cops, the landlords, the judges all wanted us to jump off the Mystic Tobin Bridge, all wanted us to sprout gills like movie monsters so we could paddle underwater back to the islands, down into the weeds and mud at the bottom, past the fish-plucked rib cages of the dead, the rusty revolvers of 1,000 crimes unsolved, the wedding rings of marriages gone bad, to we washed up on shore in a tangle of seaweed, gasping for air. Last night, still more landed here, clothing stuffed in garbage bags to flee the god of hurricanes flinging their houses into the sky, or the god of hunger slipping his knife between the ribs, not a dark tide like the tide of the Mystic River, but builders of bridges. You can walk across the bridges they build, or you can jump. So this is the title poem of the book, Floaters. Two Salvadoran migrants, father and daughter, who came to be known as Oscar and Valeria, drowned crossing the Rio Grande in June of 2019. A photograph of their bodies went viral. You might remember it. This photograph sparked outrage, sparked grief. It also sparked trutherism. There was a post in the I'm 1015 Border Patrol Facebook group charging that this photograph was a fake, doctored. The poem speaks to this photograph and to these charges. Floaters, by the way, takes its title from the term used by certain members of the Border Patrol to describe those who drown crossing over. So, floaters, epigraph. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask, have y'all ever seen floaters this clean? I'm not trying to be an ass, but I have never seen floaters like this. Could this be another edited photo? We've all seen the Dems and liberal parties do some pretty sick things. Anonymous post. I'm 1015 Border Patrol Facebook group. Like a beer bottle thrown into the river by a boy too drunk to cry. Like the shard of a styrofoam cup drained of coffee brown as the river. Like the plank of a fishing boat broken in half by the river, the dead float. And the dead have a name. Floaters, say the men of the Border Patrol, keeping watch all night by the river, hearts pumping coffee as they say the word floaters, soft as a bubble, hard as a shoe, as it nudges the body to see if it breathes, to see if it moans, to see if it sits up and speaks. And the dead have names, a feast day parade of names, names that dress all in red, names that twirl skirts, names that blow whistles, names that shake rattles, names that sing in praise of the saints. Say, Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez, Say, Angie, Valeria Martinez Avalos, see how they rise off the tongue, the calling of bird to bird somewhere in the trees above our heads, trilling in the dark heart of the leaves. Say what we know of them now they are dead. Oscar slapped dough for pizza with oven-blistered fingers. Daughter Valeria sang, banging a toy guitar. He slipped free of the apron he wore in the blast of the oven, sold the motorcycle he would kick till it sputtered to life, counted off pesos for the journey across the river, and the last of his 25 years, and the last of her 23 months. There is another name that beats its wings in the heart of the trees. Say, Tanya Vanessa Avalos, Oscar's wife and Valeria's mother, the witness, stumbling along the river. Now their names rise off her tongue. Say, Oscar y Valeria. He swam from Matamoros across to Brownsville. The girl slung around his neck, stood her in the weeds on the Texas side of the river, swore to return with her mother in hand, turning his back as fathers do, who later say, I turned around and she was gone. In the time it takes for a bird to hop from branch to branch, Valeria jumped in the river after her father. Maybe he called out her name as he swept her up from the river. Maybe the river drowned out his voice as the water swept them away. Tanya called out the names of the saints, but the saints drowsed in the stupor of birds in the dark, their cages covered with blankets. The men on patrol would never hear their pleas for asylum, watching for floaters, hearts pumping coffee all night on the Texas side of the river. No one, they say, had ever seen floaters this clean. Oscar's black shirt yanked up to the armpits, Valeria's arms slung around her father's neck, even after the light left her eyes, both face down in the weeds back on the Mexican side of the river. Another edited photo. See how her head disappears in his shirt, the waterlogged diaper bunched in her pants, the blue of the blue cans. The radio warned us about the crisis actors we see at one school shooting after another. The man called, Oscar will breathe, sit up, speak, tug the black shirt over his head, shower off the mud, and shake hands with the photographer. Yet the floaters did not float down the Rio Grande like Olympians showing off the backstroke, nor did their souls float up to Dallas, land of rumored jobs, and a president shot in the head as he waved from his motorcade. No bubbles rose from their breath in the mud, light as the iridescent circles of soap that would fascinate a 2-year-old. And the dead still have names. Names that sing in praise of the saints, names of flower and blossoms of white, a cortege of names dressed all in black, trailing the coffins to the cemetery. Carved their names in headlines and gravestones they would never know in the kitchens of this cacophonous world. Enter their names in the book of names. Say, Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez. Say, Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos. Bury them in a corner of the cemetery named for the sainted Archbishop of the Poor. Heart shot in the heart saying mass. Bullets bought by the taxes I paid when I worked as a bouncer and fractured my hand 40 years ago, and bumper stickers read, El Salvador is Spanish for Vietnam. When the last bubble of breath escapes the body, may the men who speak of floaters, who have never seen floaters this clean, float through the clouds to the heavens, where they paddle the air as they wait for the saint who flips through the keys on his ring like a drowsy janitor, till he fingers the key that turns the lock and shuts the gate on their babble-tongue faces, and they plunge back to earth, a shower of hailstones pelting the river, the Mexican side of the river. Well, I'm a firm believer in the idea that times of hate call for poems of love. My wife, Lauren, who I mentioned before, is a poet with 3 books to her credit. She's a novelist. She is a dedicated and committed teacher. She taught in urban ed for many years. She taught in the city of Springfield, Massachusetts, in particular. She would leave in the dark and she would come home in the dark. And that's the setting for the next poem. And an aubade is a French verse form having to do with the parting of lovers at dawn. Aubade with concussion. Epigraph, poverty is black ice, Naomi Adela. You leave me sleeping in the dark. You kiss me and I stir, fingers in your hair, eyes open, unseeing. You leave me asleep every morning, commuting to the school, the city at sunrise. The landlord's driveway, a muddy creek, ices over hard after the freezing rain clatters all night. Your feet fly up, your head slamming the ground, an eclipse of the sun flooding your eyes. You sleep under the car. No one knows how long you sleep. You awake with 100 ice picks stabbing your eardrums. You awake, coat and hair soaked, and somehow drive to school. You remember to turn left at the Smith & Wesson factory. The other teachers lead you by the elbow to Mercy Hospital, where you pause when the nurse asks your name, where you claim your pain level is a 4, and they slide you into the white coffin of an MRI machine. You hold your breath. They film your brain. Concussion, the word we use for the boxer plunging face first to the canvas after the uppercut blindsided him, not the teacher commuting to school at sunrise in a Subaru Crosstrek. Yet, you would drive, ears hammering as they hammer in the purgatory of the MRI. A week before, Isabella came to you in the classroom and said, "Miss, I cannot sleep. 3 days, I cannot sleep." Her boyfriend called at 2 a.m. and she did not pick up. At 3 a.m., a single shot to the head put him to sleep, and he will sleep forever, his body hidden beneath a car in a parking lot on Maple Street. The cops, the television cameras, the neighbors all gathering at the yellow tape carnival of his corpse. You said to Isabella, "Take this journal, write it down. You don't have to show me. You don't have to show anyone." On the cover of the journal you bought at the drugstore was the word dream. Isabella sat there in your classroom at your desk, pencil waving in furious circles. By lunchtime, as her friends slapped each other, Isabella slept, head on the desk, face pressed against the pages of the journal. This is why I watch you sleep at 3 a.m., when the sleeping pills fail to quell the strike meeting in my brain. This is why I say to you when you kiss me in my sleep, "Don't go, don't go. You have to go." Well, there are all kinds of love poems. This one is for Jack Agüeros. Jack Agüeros was a New York, Puerto Rican poet, playwright, essayist, translator, and the director of El Museo del Barrio in East Harlem. He was also my second father, as I often called him. So this poem is called Flan, for Jack Agüeros, 1934 to 2014. I was 8 when the blackout struck and the lights died all across the city like a massacre of fireflies. In the projects of Brooklyn, I steered myself to 14F, fingers spread against the cool tiles of the hallway, past the concrete and chicken wire terrace where I once burnt ants with a magnifying glass. Many years later, at the Chinese restaurant uptown, Jack said, "They got any flan here?" He was my first poet. I had seen the fireflies in his sonnets blink and float away. Fulano, the philosopher in the unemployment line. Blanco, the painter, painting in the madhouse. Monterosa, the dealer killed by shotgun in a bar on Avenue A. His mother, the seamstress, and the quick needle of her sewing machine. Jack, the moving man, his hands sliced raw. He stacked his apartment with dictionaries in 3 languages. I knew the raconteur's grin with every tale. Raul Julia? He's a friend of mine. A Puerto Rican playing Macbeth. He took 14 curtain calls on opening night. Maybe he would tell me now that flan was not Puerto Rican or Mexican or Spanish, but Chinese, invented by a trembling cook to satisfy the palate of an emperor in the Ming Dynasty. "No flan, Jack," I said. "This is a Chinese restaurant." 2 minutes later, he said, "They got any flan?" I showed him the dog-eared and finger-printed menu. "No flan," I said. When the waiter unfurled his pad, Jack said to him, "You got flan." He sang this song for an hour. The egg roll was not flan. The fried rice was not flan. The fortune cookie was not flan. "Can we get some flan?" he said. "God damn it, Jack," I said. The poets crowded into the bar, striding to the mic. Jack stood with poem in hand, read the title, tilted his head, and said it again. Studied the page as if the words shriveled up like ants burnt under a magnifying glass, then sat down. I witnessed the massacre of fireflies. A few of us clapped, not knowing what to do with our hands, staring at the sonneteer who lost all his quatrains and couplets in the denim jacket he left on the subway, the words of Fulano still waiting on the unemployment line. "The faster you spin, the stiller you look, there's something to learn in that. But what?" After the diagnosis, I handed Jack a book of poems. He dangled the book upside down like a stiff mouse by the tail, something we would sniff behind the refrigerator. I wanted sonnets. Jack kept singing the chorus of a song. "Get me to the church, get me to the church, get me to the church on time." At the end, I leaned over Jack's bed to read his own poem in his ear, but some words come home after the blackout, fingers crawling on the wall. I know what I should have said at the Chinese restaurant. "Jack, let's get some flan." We should have braved the subway at rush hour, strap hangers rocking all the way to 14th Street and 8th Avenue to La Taza de Oro, gone now like Jack for rice and beans, squid in its own ink, café con leche y flan, Jack. A spoonful of flan for you after all the years of sonnets and bread for me. The steam rising when your hands crack the crust at the table. I am from the East New York section of Brooklyn, and the Linden Project's there. That's the setting of the next poem. My father was a community organizer and a documentary photographer. Francisco Luis Espada, Frank Espada. It's an early morning in 1968. Death rides the elevator in Brooklyn. On a winter morning in 1968, my father left to walk the picket line. He rode the elevator in his black coat, hood over his head, in the hour before daybreak. On the third floor, the doors opened. A white man waiting for the elevator stood there, peered at my father in his black coat and hood, in his brown skin, then screamed and fled. The doors closed. My father laughed on the picket line that morning. He laughed for years. "The guy thought I was deaf," he would say. Death rides an elevator in Brooklyn. Mugger, death. Militant, death. Puerto Rican, death. Listening to the story, as the screaming man screamed louder with every telling, I never thought one day my father would be the man standing there waiting for the elevator doors to open. He did not stare or scream or run. He stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind him. Thank you. This is my last poem. You can actually see in the chat my father's obituary from the New York Times. My wife, Lauren, dropped that and other links during the reading. My father, Francisco Luis Espada, Frank Espada, was born in the mountain town of Utuado, Puerto Rico in the year 1930, and he died in Pacifica, California in the year 2014. When Hurricane Maria hit the island of Puerto Rico in the fall of 2017, I suddenly saw my father's birthplace, Utuado, everywhere, on television, on the internet, in the headlines. As John Lee Anderson put it in the pages of the New Yorker, Utuado had become, quote, a byword for the island's devastation. The official death toll was 3,000, unofficially more like 4,000. I started talking to my father, who had, of course, died 3 years before. Actually, I started talking to his ashes in a box on my bookshelf. That was the genesis of the last poem I read and the last poem in this book. Letter to my father, October 2017. You once said, "My reward for this life would be 1,000 pounds of dirt shoveled in my face." You were wrong. You are 7 pounds of ashes in a box, a Puerto Rican flag wrapped around you next to a red brick from the house in Utuado where you were born, all crammed together on my bookshelf. You taught me there is no God, no life after this life, so I know you're not watching me type this letter over my shoulder. When I was a boy, you were God. I watched from the 7th floor of the projects as you walked down into the street to stop a public execution. A big man caught a small man stealing his car, and everyone in Brooklyn heard the car alarm wail of the condemned, "He's killing me!" At a word from you, the executioner's hand slipped from the hair of the thief. "The kid was high," was all you said when you came back to us. When I was a boy, and you were God, we flew to Puerto Rico. You said, "My grandfather was the mayor of Utuado. His name was Buenaventura. That means good fortune." I believed in your grandfather's name. I heard the tree frogs chanting to each other all night. I saw a banana leaf and elephant palm sprouting from the mountain's belly. I gnawed the mango's pit, and the sweet yellow hair stuck between my teeth. I said to you, "You came from another planet. How'd you do it?" You said, Every morning, just before I woke up, I saw the mountains. Every morning, I see the mountains. And Utuado, 3 sisters, all in their 70s, all bedridden, all Pentecostales who only left the house for church, lay sleeping on mattresses spread across the floor. When the hurricane gutted the mountain, the way a butcher slices open a dangled pig, and a rolling wall of mud buried them, leaving the 4th sister to stagger into the street, screaming like an unheeded prophet about the end of the world. And Utuado, a man who cultivated a garden of aguacate and carambola, feeding the avocado and star fruit to his nieces from New York, saw the trees in his garden beheaded all at once like the soldiers of a beaten army, and so hanged himself. And Utuado, a welder and a handyman, rigged a pulley with a shopping cart to ferry rice and beans across the river where the bridge collapsed, witnessed the cart swing above so many hands, then raised the sign that told the helicopters, Campamento Los Olvidados, Camp of the Forgotten. Los Olvidados wait 7 hours in line for a government meal of Skittles and Vienna sausage, or a tarp to cover the bones of a house with no roof as the fungus grows on their skin from sleeping on mattresses drenched with the spit of the hurricane. They drink the brown water, waiting for microscopic monsters in their bellies to visit plagues upon them. A nurse says, "These people are going to have an epidemic. These people are going to die." The president flips rolls of paper towels to a crowd at a church in Guaynabo, Zeus lobbing thunderbolts on the locked ward of his delusions. Down the block, cousin Ricardo, Bernice's boy, says that somebody stole his can of diesel. "I heard somebody ask you once where Puerto Rico needed to be free, and you said, 3 pulgadas de sangre en la calle." 3 inches of blood in the street. Now, 3 inches of mud flow through the streets of Utuado, and troops patrol the town as if guarding the vein of copper in the ground, as if a shovel digging graves in the backyard might strike the ore below, as if La Brigada swinging machetes to clear the road might remember the last uprising. I know you are not God. I have the proof. 7 pounds of ashes in a box on my bookshelf. Gods do not die, and yet I want you to be God again. Stride from the crowd to seize the president's arm before another roll of paper towels sails away. Thunder Spanish obscenities in his face. Banish him to a roofless rainstorm in Utuado, so he unravels one soaked sheet after another till there is nothing left but his cardboard heart. I promised myself I would stop talking to you, white box of gray grit. You were deaf even before you died. Hear my promise now. I will take you to the mountains where houses lost like ships at sea rise, blue and yellow from the mud. I will open my hands. I will scatter your ashes. Utuado. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together, please, for Martin Espada.
Gracias.
Martin Espada and Denis Gray. Fabulous narrative quotes and so much more. There's in the chat, you can see where to buy Martin's book. But we're going to hear another song from Josie Bello, and please stick around because we have an opportunity for a few minutes of Q&A after Josie's song. So think about what you might want to ask Martin or Denis or both. Josie Bello, take it away.
prayed for peace, prayed for cures, prayed for loved ones, mine and yours. Prayed through every hardship I ever endured, and held on tight to God when I felt insecure. Prayed for life when I was out of hope. Then I prayed real hard that I could learn to cope. In darkest times I prayed for a way to get myself to another day. But now I'm empty. Prayed for so many, cried for today and for tomorrow. My heart is heavy, full of sorrow. I'm out of ways to beg for rescue. May God bless you and show you mercy. I'm out of prayers. I am empty. Pray to God with all my might that everyone would be alright. I prayed even when I had doubt that I could understand what higher power was about. But now I'm empty. Prayed for so many, cried for today and for tomorrow. My heart is heavy, full of sorrow. I'm out of ways to beg for rescue. May God bless you and show you mercy. I'm out of prayers. I am empty. Out of prayers. I am empty. I am empty. Thank you.
Josie Bella, welcome back. So much beauty you bring to these performances that you've had with us with Walking with Whitman. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
Now, if I may, I'm going to start off the question because, and I think this is a question for both Martine and for Denis, in that in your book Floaters and in the lead poem, Martine, you made a big point of talking about names and concretizing the people that were floaters in the poem by giving them names. It's something which I found characteristic to more than one of your poems. The one that I remember was Jorge the Janitor, which is very much about a person who was not given the respect of being called by his name. This seems to be a recurring theme. I think of Pedro Pietri and Puerto Rican Obituary. I think of Woody Guthrie and his song Deportees. You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane, and all they will call you will be deportees. So I think also for you, Denis, the name Mordecai, which kept occurring, the naming of people and giving them, concretizing them and using their names in the poem seems to have multiple different kinds of meanings and purposes. Could each of you speak to that particular thing, the meaning of names in your poetry?
Well, I can start if you like, George. The power of naming is a great power. Who gets to name the history? Who gets to name the experience? And naming is one way of humanizing the dehumanized. It's one way of pushing back against suffering and against death. And so I think it was not a coincidence at all that when the photograph that is the subject of my poem Floaters went viral, the names came with it. And they were known simply as Oscar and Valeria. People wanted those names to go with this horrible image as a way of restoring some humanity, as a way of restoring some sense of dignity. And of course, in the poem, I take it to the next level by insisting on their full names and insisting that we repeat them, whether we can say them or not. That we must insist on repeating them. We must insist on their dignity and on their humanity. So yes, that is a consistent theme in my work. Not only the power of naming, but the power of poetry to humanize the dehumanized and to take part in that battle for dignity over indignity.
As for me, I don't really look at it at all. I just wait for it to come, the characters, because I just feel very spiritual about everything when it comes to my stories, when it comes to the people in my stories. I just finished a new book called Lomax Freeman, The Essence of a Man. And I wrote it a few years back and I was drafting it. And so at that point, I've never really changed names. Those names fit so perfectly in my heart and in my mind eventually, and felt right all the time. But then suddenly there were three characters who were misnamed, if you want to say that. I didn't feel as powerful, as strong a connection with them. As soon as I did change the names, I felt more in connection with them. Therefore, my writing became stronger because they led me into a better space. So that's how I work with names. I really don't think about it, but I know when they're right, and then I proceed with them. So that's what it turns out, how it turns out.
Great, thank you.
But I like Martine's explanation. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, what I mean, Martine is dealing with characters and the meaning of names. I hear you using Mordecai as a way to drive, as a drive to move the narrative forward and keep touching back at the base of the name, almost as a core to the narrative movement forward, the verbal movement forward.
Well, I just don't give it any thought. I just love spontaneity. I love surprise. It's like all of us as artists, we love surprises. I mean, we don't know what we're going to write most of the time. When I was a poet, I think poetry taught me that first line belongs to something, has a body, and so when you get something that's right, you know that it's going to work for you.
Great, thank you. I'm welcoming any questions from the audience. If you want to unmute yourself and ask either of these fine gentlemen a question. Do I hear something from Maggie Bloomfield? Maggie? No.
You can also type your questions in the chat too, if you don't feel comfortable.
going to ask Francine, a flash fiction writer, if she has anything to say about listening to long fiction. Microphone.
Sorry about that. Well, one thing that struck me actually in both readings was how strong the voice is. And I think it's very important. I think with flash fiction, the voice, because you're working with such a short, container, that you can be very, like that. But I noticed in both Martine and Denis's readings, the voice is very sustained and it's very powerful. And I really applaud you for that. And I was wondering, like, what do you do? Either of you gentlemen might answer. What do you do to ensure that your voice comes through on the page when you don't have the benefit of your vocal accompaniment to your poetry or your fiction? What can you do, like as a writer? Like, what tricks do you, I don't know, tricks is trivializing it, but what do you do to make sure that your writing sings the way it does when you say it?
You want to start it off, Denis?
No, you go ahead, Martine, because I like listening to you.
Okay.
I'm not philosophical. You have a brain. I'm just trying my best.
Well, this is really a craft question, I think. And the answer for me is to answer the question, how do I assure that that the poem sings, is I sing it. In other words, I read it out loud in the process of composition. And so, quite aside from the narrative, quite aside from the politics, quite aside from the philosophy, quite aside from the images, there must also be music, and there must be musicality, the music of the words themselves as they come together. So there are various devices that make that happen, various tools in the poet's toolbox, so to speak. So I rely on anaphora, and I rely on epistrophe, and I rely on alliteration, and I rely on assonance, and internal rhymes, and this, that, the other. But above all, I hear it by reading it out loud as I'm writing it. And if a line does not pass muster as sound, out it comes. If a word goes clink or clunk, out it comes. And I will make myself quite crazy in the process. And so I am accustomed to continually moving words and lines in and out here and there. And I certainly didn't invent this. For example, I teach one of the great anti-war poems, Dulce de Coram Est, by Wilfred Owen. And Owen went through numerous drafts of that poem, and those drafts had as much to do with the music of words, with the language, the choice between gargling and guttering as anything else. So we now read that poem, or we hear that poem, there's this visceral effect that even more than a century later we take away from it. But it's also the result of craft, and he was, even in the face of war and an early death, as fastidious as a bird feathering a nest. And so I learned from the likes of him, but so many others as well. When I put Jack Agüeros in that number, one who wrote sonnets, broken sonnets, as it turns out, because he hated sticking to the form. But that's is as much this is poetry, and we even use the word poetry. It implies musicality. It has to sing, or it isn't poetry.
I can't go that far with anything that, I mean, these things confuse me most of the time. I don't know, I just find myself when I'm writing, just enjoying it so much that when I do all my drafts, which I do quite a few, I'm very narrow-minded about certain things. But what I'm more careful about is than anything is construction and taking care of this problem first and knowing there's another problem. And then it becomes minutia. And then you work on all of those elements. And I really don't give a lot of thought to anything like that. I just look at what's on that page and I know it's either bad or good. And if it's good, I'm going to try to enhance it as much as I can, so get the most out of it. But I'm not a deep thinker in that regard. I just love, again, spontaneity so much. I love just finding the characters so much and feeling so good about the fact that I can go in depth with them and let them be who they are. It's just like I wrote this one book and I started it off and I was trying to sanitize the character. He was in prison, so there wasn't going to be any sanitizing. And as soon as I did my about fifth draft, and I just let the guy say MF, what MF stands for in the book. He said, "Thank you very much. That's who I am." So it's just finding those elements, those things in people, and letting them ride you, and you not ride them.
I could just jump in there and ask, both of you seem to have right characters. And there's a difference between reading a poem and acting a poem. I think, am I wrong in saying that you're both acting out the parts of the speakers or the persona or the character in each of your poems? Yes? No?
Well, I don't think I could do this without a heaping helping of ham. I do have some background in theater, even radio theater, going way back to my 20s. And I was for a little while in a Shakespearean company. We did comedies, and I got all the big guy parts. I wasn't particularly dignified. Laurence Olivier, I was not. But you learned something about theatricality, and you learn something about performance and presentation, and yes, there are characters in these poems, and yes, they have their own voices, and I do indeed hear Jack, who had the thickest New York accent you've ever heard in your life, every time I read that poem, Flan. And it's that's not me anymore. That's Jack. He took 14 curtain calls on opening night. That's how he used to talk, and I never associated that accent with anything but erudition, because Jack was so erudite. At the same time, he was, born and raised right there in East Harlem. So yeah, those are performances certainly embedded in the poetry. And same thing with my father. That every single thing my father says in that last poem, Letter to My Father, he actually said. My father talked in italics. He's one of those people, And I would say, and a lot of this, because it is so, deep within my memory and deep within my experience, I don't calculate it. I don't want to come off as sounding like I sort of there's a sort of mathematics of poetry. I'm not doing that. A lot of what I'm doing, a lot of what you're hearing, is also spontaneous and instinctive. And the magic for me oftentimes is in revision. And those voices I also revise over and over again until they, those are the people. Those are the people walking through the poems, walking through the pages.
I'll take this in, if I may. Lisa James, whose mic isn't working, asks, I think, a question for both of you, and the balance between the personal and the political. When you're writing a poem and it's a personal experience, or it's derived from a personal experience, and yet has political content or political moment or significance to it, how do you draw that balance? Are you writing in a personal poem, or are you writing a political poem, or are you balancing those two things as you do that?
Well, let's not forget that I was raised in an activist household. Not only that, but my father too was an artist. My father was a documentary photographer. He created something called the Puerto Rican Diaspora Documentary Project, a photo documentary of the Puerto Rican migration. And his work is collected everywhere in the Smithsonian Museum of American History, Smithsonian Museum of American Art, National Portrait Gallery, Library of Congress, on and on. You can find his work online. But I grew up with his photographs hanging on the walls of our apartment in Brooklyn, but also on the walls of my imagination, where they still hang to this day. So I had a model. I had an example to follow. My father never made any distinction between the personal and the political. He never made any distinction between politics and art. The whole idea was absurd. And I can imagine I would never try to have that conversation with him. He would have laughed at me or yelled at me or both. And so, this to me was all integrated long before I ever matured myself as a poet and began to hear people question these distinctions. How can you do such a thing? And for me, it was like, well, how would I breathe? In, out, in, out. I understand that there is a balance to be struck. I am well aware of the poems that don't work as poetry because they are too heavily polemical or too heavily didactic. And, I try to find a way into a theme or a subject so that I'm at least present in some way. I'm not always at the center of the poem. You probably figured that out. Even in the first poem I read, I'm there in the first half and I kind of go away, and more often than not, I'm standing in the corner of the poem and I am letting you know that, yes, I saw this. Yes, I heard this. Yes, this happened, but this is not about me. This is about something much more than me. And that is, that's also about balance, because there are too many poets who want to, go stride across their poem like a colossus. And then it becomes too much about the poet,
So the personal experience can become a springboard to the political.
Absolutely. It could become a springboard, or the board may break, Now, I mean, having said all that, I like the idea of, having some personal presence in a political poem. On the other hand, I'm not present at all in floaters. And that's because I took the risk. I took a chance. I pushed myself. I decided to go beyond the boundaries of what I usually permit myself to do. I was moved by that photograph, and I was outraged by that Border Patrol Facebook page. And I went from there. And I wrote that poem for a benefit, as sometimes happens with my poetry. Somebody's asked me to do something and show up and read it at a benefit. And I did. It was a benefit for migrant rights in Boston. I showed up, I read the poem, and here we are.
And with you, Denis, is this, you have a consistent thematic and subject matter, blues, jazz, performance, stage, urban environment. Is this something that you made a conscious decision to write about because of its social political context, or it's just what you're doing and whatever?
No, I really don't invest myself in a poem. I really I can't write like that at all. I think it's wonderful for people who can do that. All I'm interested in is listening to the character. I wrote this real long book when I first started. It was like 3,000 some odd pages of handwritten pages, and it was probably turned out about a 1,500 page book. And it taught me a lot. What it taught me was that my characters know more about their story than I do. I know nothing about their story. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they're striving for. What's important for me is to write a novel, though, is to know the beginning and the ending of the story, and everything else in the middle is a mess. I don't know anything about it. What I love about that is that these characters, especially the strong, and not that I have to be strong, but the ones I spent a lot of time with, they teach me things that I would never do in my life. I would never do these things, George, at all. So I love them because I see a situation and I say, I would have handled it that way. And yet they handle it an entirely different way. And they teach me, not that I would follow that course that they do, but they send me into a situation where I have no understanding of, and then I start understanding it through them. So that's how I use them. I mean, they become a vessel, and they just feed information to me. I listen to them, I write for them. So it's their story. I never get involved in any. One time I did get involved, and I was actually having an argument with my father instead of the character having an argument with his father. So when I saw that, I said, that's me arguing with my father, and it's not the character. So I just listen to them, follow them. And one time in another book, this person said, no, this is not how this happened. And I went back in a few pages in my draft, and I saw that, yes, this is how it happened. Now I can write for you. It was the most amazing thing. I went and found why this character said this to me. It was a character's name, Jericho Walls. I published that. And it just changed the whole shape of the work. I was able to give it a different book, and I never I never changed my ending. But that book, I had to change even the ending of the book. So that's how I operate. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you both. It's 8:48, 8:49, and I think we've had a wonderful hour and 49 minutes. Other questions?
I'd ask a question.
Yes, Luke?
I have a question for either one of you. Do you let other people edit your work? Have you ever, or
I'm sorry,
would you now let someone else edit your work? Change it substantially.
What stage? Any stage are we talking about? Are you actually right? Or I don't know.
Well, probably when it's done and when you think it's done.
Oh, well, it always has to be edited. It always, I mean, a novelist, I don't know about Martine, you know, I mean, but as an artist, as a writer, a novelist, it always has to be edited.
So you're willing to let someone be in your process?
Yeah, they don't invade. They're not terrible or awful. They're really not. They're wonderful. They have great ideas, and they correct some things. And they know the language better than I do. And it might be some modern thing that they're doing now, or contemporary things that they're doing now that I'm not aware of in that field of editing. And they are able to bring something like that to it. It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's beautiful working with editors. Mm-hmm. At least I found it to be my experiences. Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of my reading, I thanked my wife, Lauren, for being present on every page of Floaters. And that's not just rhetoric. It's not just about the love poems, of which there's a series in the heart of the book, in the center of the book. I mean it. It's on every page, and at every stage as well. So, obviously it begins with the manuscript. And then from the manuscript, it goes to copy editing, and from copy editing to page proofs, and another set of page proofs. And, depending on the Publisher, there might be many sets of page proofs depending on how many times they screw up. But as far as Lauren's presence, she is someone who I am open to, I listen to about anything and everything. Now, Lauren has experience teaching adult literacy in all kinds of urban areas. And if you are teaching adult literacy, you have to know the rules cold. And so she will pick up on things I have missed. And I think I'm a pretty literate guy. You know, poet this, professor that, lawyer this. And she always finds something I've missed more than once. It's remarkable. I think she could spot a typo on a billboard a quarter of a mile away. And so whether it's typos or grammar, punctuation, consistency, you have to think about consistency, but also more substantive things as well. And just the other day, we engaged in an interesting exercise. She gave me a prompt. She said, I want you to write this such and such a poem, and it should have these words, and it should have it, you know, and you should be doing this in the poem and that in the poem. And I'm not going to read that. First of all, it's too late. Secondly, the poem is truly the craziest, scariest thing I think I've ever written. But we are both very, very happy with it. And it will be making its debut somewhere at probably a midnight movie theater. But anyway, everybody needs an editor. More to the point, everybody needs a first reader or a first listener. And I return the favor. So Lauren is working now on a second draft of a novel, and she will come out. One of my favorite moments in life is when Lauren walks out of her office and she's got her laptop in her hand and she says the magic words, "Can I read?" And I put down whatever I'm doing, you know, which most of the time isn't that interesting anyway. And she sits down and she reads, and I listen. And that's exactly what's going on. This is constant reciprocity, you know, and I'm very grateful for that, both as a reader, as a listener, and as a writer.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
William Stafford, the late great American poet, told me a story on a dock at Freeport. He said he wrote a poem every day. And in the morning, when his wife and his son, Kit, would get up, they would find that poem in a basket in the kitchen. And they would take the poem out and they would look at the poem and read it, put it back in. And then the other person would read it as well. And then they would tell you what they thought of the poem. And William Stafford's exact words to me about this was, and if they didn't like the poem, I would just lower my standards. So yes, everybody needs a first reader. I agree with that. Listen, wonderful, wonderful time we had tonight. Thank you both, Martina Espada, Denis Gray, and Josie Bello, of course, for returning to us. Megan, do you have any final words to give us from the birthplace?
Well, in the beginning of the chat, I did put the link in there if you would like to donate to the museum. I also put in the chat too that the link that you can buy Martine's book also from us too. So we have that in our gift shop, and if you're not local, we will ship it to you as well. That's pretty much it. We will have some. There's our Long Island Poet of the Year that's coming up in April, so keep a lookout for that email. And no, that's pretty much it, George. And thank you for all for coming.
Thanks again. Thank you all. On behalf of the Walt Whitman Birthplace, I'd like to thank you all for having joined us today, and we'll see you next month, the first Friday of May.
May 6th.
May 6th, yes. We'll be doing the New York City anthology.
Yes.
hard from the inside. Thanks again for joining us. Good night, everybody. Adios. Thank you again.
Night.
You.
Right?